Okay, so we have three speakers today, if they'd like to come back on camera for a moment. The first is Shahar Keenan, CEO. With over 50 published peer-reviewed manuscripts, Dr. Keenan is a pioneer in the advancement of drug discovery. Her in-depth knowledge of computational and theoretical chemistry, combined with her extensive business background, is the foundation for her unique skill set, which she brings as co-founder and CEO of Polaris Quantum Biotech. Prior to her success with PolarisQB, she obtained a PhD in theoretical chemistry from the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, held research positions at Northwestern and Duke universities, and served as CSO for Cloud Pharmaceuticals. So welcome, Shahar. Next up, we have Bill Shipman, who's a CTO. He's a system designer and engineer with experience in cloud computing, implementation of theoretical systems, interactive voice response systems, and mobile application development. His educational background is in database design and programming, operating systems, compiler construction, symbolic artificial intelligence, and quite a bit of other things. He previously served as CTO of Cloud Pharmaceuticals. Thirdly, we have Maurice Benson. He enjoys working closely with scientists to provide algorithmic, data management, and computational support for great ideas. He has over 16 years of software development experience and excels in leading interdisciplinary teams to build technical solutions that build real value to their customers. Since its inception, he has helped PolarisQB build their data pipeline that includes cloud, AI, and quantum solutions. So with that, we are going to get started. Again, we are recording this. We will send you a link. And Shahar, welcome.
Thanks, Susan. Thanks, the participant, for coming and listening to what we want to talk about. We want specifically today to talk about quantum in life science, how the work that we're doing in drug discovery from Polaris, and how we run it on the D-Wave systems. I hope everybody can see the slides. And let's start. So Polaris Quantum Biotech, and we are the only computer-aided molecular design company, and we do drug design, mainly using quantum annealing. And we would like you guys to join us in the quantum revolution. Let's start talking who is Polaris. So we are 3.5 years old, almost. We are located in Durham, North Carolina, but we are a virtual company. And as I said, we built the first ever drug discovery platform using a quantum annealer. We have a validated platform. We did 50 new projects in 22. In a short while, we will replace this for how many we've done in 23, and the number is going to go up. We just received the DARPA Impact Award to continue our work. And right now we're offering quantum as a software as a service, quantum as a service. This is a software subscription that we started offering to pharma companies. Why do we do that? Why can't pharma companies or other biotech companies like us continue to do things the way they have done them in the last maybe 20 or 30 years? The issue is that drug design is, and I'm using here the language of quantum computing, which is drug design is a multi-object optimization process. So when you look for a molecule that will become a drug, of course, it needs to have the activity, the biological activity that will make it a drug. But it also needs to have a whole set of other properties that will make it a good drug. One of them, of course, is that you need to be able to synthesize it. You need to have low side effects. You want something that will be able to get from the stomach into your blood, but maybe you don't want that to go from the blood into the brain. Each one of these is a property, and you need to optimize that property. We want a molecule that will have all of those properties and do the biological activity. So it's a multi-object optimization problem. And today, the way the pharma companies are doing it is by doing single property optimization. So maybe they first look at molecules that will have the biological activity. And then they take the best one and say, okay, now let's optimize and make sure that this molecule is soluble. And they find the best molecule that is soluble and have the biological activity. And then they say, okay, but is it biodegradable? So the combination of each one of those single object optimization can take time, can take people time, and has a cost. Each time they look at a small number of molecules, maybe 1,000 molecules at each one of these optimizations. What we're doing, which is very different, is we're saying, don't look at 1,000 every time and optimize a single property. Look at a much larger chemical space, which is the molecules that you're looking at. We're looking right now at 10 to the power of 30 molecules, which is orders of magnitude bigger than anybody else in the industry. And we are finding molecules that, of course, bind to the target, so has the biological activity, but also soluble, biodegradable, the level of toxicity that we are interested in, and other properties. So we're doing a multi-object optimization on a very large chemical space to find the molecule that previously would take 3 years, now is much faster. And the reason we do that is because we can do that is because we are using quantum annealer and the D-wave quantum annealer specifically. And this gives us the highest probability of finding the right molecule the first time around. We translate the chemistry to the language of quantum computing. So if you start from a protein with a binding pocket, we start from a chemical space, a library of molecules, very large number of molecules. And on the quantum annealer, we find the molecules that have the properties that we are interested in and find the optimized set that have all of these properties. And you can read more about that in our publication there. We call this QUAD, quantum-aided drug design. And we have impressive results, early results from QUAD. And these are just the beginning of those results. If anybody's interested in learning more, of course, let us know. We will be happy to send you some white papers about that. So some of the things that we've already seen from QUAD. First of all, we find good molecules. Okay, so we compare the molecules that we find to other molecules in the literature and to what chemists do by hand. We find that the molecules that we find from QUAD are better. We get to them faster, and they have a better profile, global profile of the molecules that we are interested in. The molecules that we find are diverse. So they're new molecules. They're not just similar to molecules that are known in the literature, which is important for writing the patent on these molecules. So building a new IP around them. We also find that we rediscover known molecules. So if a molecule is a good drug for this specific target, biological target, we can rediscover it. So which is something that we are interested in just to validate our system, but also to look at what's the patent environment around those molecules that we are interested in. And of course, we find molecules that are better have better drug-like. So the molecules that we find have the whole properties that we are interested in. QUAD is we're just now beginning to work with it, and we're really excited to see more and more case studies coming out, and the things that we can find out more with QUAD. I will stop here and let Bill continue telling you about quantum computing and why we use it.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Shar. So again, I'm Bill Shipman, CTO and co-founder of Polaris Quantum Biotech. Slide, please. Very good. So let's take a moment and pause. Shar's talked about properties several times. So properties are a component of data. So big data is a term that's bandied about quite a bit, and cats are relatively ubiquitous. Asking the internet today, there's roughly 6.5 billion images of cats on the internet. Mileage may vary, but that's the order of magnitude we can think about for big data. I saw another poll saying that roughly 2,500 images were taken by cat owners annually, so that's per owner. So we can think about that in terms of the growth rate of the available big data pertaining to cats. As Shar was talking about properties of cats or properties, we can think about cat properties. Cats generally have 4 legs, a tail, usually 2 ears, usually 2 eyes, and they purr. We can contrast that to pharmaceutical data, whereby we have a much smaller data set in terms of true positive representations of drugs. There's fewer than 20,000 FDA approved drugs available on the market. These drugs are very diverse in terms of the characteristics they'll have, contrasting to the consistent properties of cats, tails, ears, eyes. Drugs come in biologics. They come as small molecules. Some will be cardiovascular, some will be for dermatology. So it's incredibly robust data set that is very diverse, and they don't well represent one another in the way that one cat well represents another cat. Looking at the rate of data accumulation for drugs, there's only about 5,000 drugs in the approval pipeline annually. And there's an incredibly low approval rate. So we do not anticipate having, it's unreasonable to expect there to be a bonanza of new drug data as more true positives to use in the future. The bandwidth of the drug pipeline there is roughly 2 cat owners for context. Slide, please. So why are we using quantum computers and why now? Given the small amount of data, we can't well model that using other technologies, and speed and cost are significant considerations for us. So using the annealer, we're able to look at incredibly large chemical spaces, 10 to the 30 molecules. That's an intractable number to do in a brute force manner or on most classical computing systems. So being able to represent our our problem in solution space was very important to us. We represent it in the format of a QUBO, quadratic unconstrained binary optimization. D-Wave has been a fabulous partner in terms of the training and engineering support in terms of getting our workforce up to speed with the annealing system. It allows for incredibly rapid iteration cycle time as chemists uncover new characteristics of the protein binding pockets that we want to adjust part of the QUBO to look at a different part of chemical space. So that's pretty amazing for us. Slide, please. So thinking about, again, why we're using quantum computing. D-Wave as our primary hardware provider, we were able to get started with their 2000 Q system. When the Advantage system came online, which has over 5,000 qubits, that really married up nicely to the size of our solution space. And the other quantum providers are unable to scale to that size of solution space that we need. It's an incredibly diverse ecosystem. As you can see, there's other biotechs working on proteins and peptides. Those could be future collaborators or provide other insight into problem representations and solutions. There's a variety of software providers that, again, are providing interesting solutions and novel interfaces that could be potential partners. We really believe that quantum computing is the wave of the future, and I'm really excited to be early adopters. Slide, please. So a little bit more on quantum annealing. Shar mentioned the need to do multi-object optimization and talked about several of the properties. We're able to look at many of those properties concurrently and resolve preclinical candidates in a minute of QPU time. That's orders of magnitude faster than we could reasonably do on classical computing. Some other examples of optimization, just to help frame part of this conversation, would be knapsack packing. There's a great example of it with Quantum South. That was an airplane packing challenge, whereby 2 different Airbus models were selected for packing problems, whereby the objects that the objective components that you're trying to optimize are the filling the plane with constraints on volume, weight, number of components to the system. It's just a really nice example that has a lot of parallels to what we're doing. Another example that's also an optimization problem would be Savant X, working with the Port of Los Angeles. That represents a pathfinding problem. Again, just another form of an optimization problem, whereby port cranes have to move with ships, and it's a highly dynamic system. As I think we're all painfully aware of supply chain problems, being able to rapidly change your optimization pattern to feed real world circumstances is truly important. So those are 3 great examples of optimization. Next slide, please. So to provide a little more visualization of classical computing versus quantum computing, I think this graphic really shows nicely the linear process that most classical computers exhibit. So as it's trying to find its way through the maze, it's able to move forward, find a dead end, and then have to go back to the last known valid position and start again. So it's a very computationally intensive process that, while it is able to solve a problem, as the solution space grows, this quickly becomes an infeasible solution. Next slide. So in contrast with the quantum computer, it's able to explore the space essentially as one shot. In this visualization, you'll see that as it encounters a bifurcation in the path, it immediately expands to fill out the solution or fill out the maze space. That's very emblematic of how a quantum annealer works, whereby the problem starts as a high energy state and anneals, it moves up and down a temperature gradient so that your solutions are found at the bottom of the energy well. So I hope this helps with the understanding of how quantum computing and annealing works. Next slide. So to tie this all together then, we're using annealers to look at incredibly large computational spaces, orders of magnitude larger than our peer group and competitors. This allows us to find better molecules in a orders of magnitude shorter time. And with that, I will pass to our next speaker.
All right, my name is Maurice Benson. I'm principal engineer with Polaris Quantum Biotech. First, thanks for D-Wave for hosting us. This is a great opportunity. And thank you, Shahar, for presenting the chemistry behind the problem and why we kind of leaned into quantum computing. And thanks to Bill for presenting how the numbers kind of added up to why we chose to dive into quantum computing. Now, what I'm going to do is walk us through a practical example of how we could use the quantum computer. This practice is very close to what we do internally, but not exactly. We have a few different techniques, but it gives you an idea of how we're using QC. And then also this portion of the talk is aimed definitely towards beginners. There's a lot of great material out there if you want to dig in and get a deeper dive, but this is kind of high-level brushstrokes of how we're going about solving this problem. And we've got a lot to cover and a little bit of time. So just a quick rundown of what we'll do is I'm going to cover the problem, and then we're going to talk about how D-Wave is going to help us solve the problem. We'll talk about a bit of the math behind the optimization, and then we'll talk about how our problem maps to that math. And then at the very end, I'll give you guys some Python snippets with some of the D-Wave Ocean SDK on how we'd actually solve that problem. And with that, let's go to the next slide. All right, so the problem is that there's a hip new chicken and waffles restaurant that just opened up in town, and our customer wants to go check it out. But there are 2 issues. One, our customer's on the budget, so they have to be very fiscally conservative. And then 2, that they want to watch their weight. So they want to make sure any meal that they order is less than 700 calories. Next slide. So our customer is a little computer savvy, and they're able to go on to the internet and find the menu and compile a spreadsheet consisting of the item type, whether it's a chicken, a waffle, schmear, drizzle, a side, that also are able to gather the price for each of those items and how much calories is in each of those items. The restaurant only sells complete meals. So the meal has to consist of a waffle, chicken, schmear, drizzle, and a side. So unfortunately, our customer cannot order a whole meal of mac and cheese, even though that sounds fantastic. Those values are captured in the item type. We'll talk a bit more about that later. And luckily, our diner has access to the D-Wave CQM solver. Next slide. All right, so how does D-Wave support the CQM and what is it? Right, so the CQM is a constrained quadratic model, and it's just a way of describing optimization problems. And why do we care about this way? It's really because of D-Wave's leap hybrid sampler. It's intended to solve these arbitrary application problems formatted as quadratic models. So we can build the CQM and then D-Wave can solve it using the best of both classical and quantum technology. The CQM model currently supports 500,000 variables, 100,000 constraints, and 2 billion biases. So it's perfect for mapping our restaurant problem on. There shouldn't be any issue using the QC for this. Next slide, please. All right, so our first step is we're going to have to try to build the CQM of the problem. We have to kind of understand how our problem, how we're going to break this apart. So to build the CQM, we have to break our problem into an objective and then a series of constraints. And we could kind of think of our objective is that we know our customer wants to save money. So the objective of our optimization is to try to find the cheapest meal. And then we also know now that the restaurant only serves a meal with one of each item type per meal. So we know that's another objective, that there has to be one waffle, one chicken, one drizzle, one schmear. And our diner also wants meals that are less than 700 calories. So the optimization is constrained to solutions that, depending on what choices are picked, those choices have to be less than 700 calories. All right, so now we've got our objective and constraints, and we'll look at some math. So I don't know about all of you, but the first time I saw this equation, it was a little scary, but it's really not that bad once you start breaking it up. So the one thing we'll talk about really quick on this slide is that we have those x sub i's and the x sub j's, the x's with the subscript. We could think of those as our decision variables, right? So those are binary variables. They can either be 1 or 0. So you can kind of think of these as, is the menu item, has it been chosen by the solution or is it not chosen by the solution? So we'll think about that as we keep on digging through this map. And go to the next slide, please. All right, so we'll take a look at the left side of our objective function. So we've already said that those x and the subscript, those are decisions. It's just 1 or 0. Is this decision happening or not? We could think of the a sub I on that side as like a weight. It could be a penalty or an incentive for choosing that x sub I in our system. Next slide. So this is nearly the same. We see our x sub I still in there, but now we have the x sub j2. And the b sub j of I is now our weight for it choosing both x sub I and j sub I. So this is where we can start both penalizing and incentivizing pairs of variables. The way I'd like to think about this, or the way we think about this in our problem, is maybe sometimes, maybe our restaurant has like a peanut butter waffle or something like that, and they also have an Italian vinaigrette. Maybe those two choices don't go well together, so we want to penalize that choice. This is how we could represent that type of constraint or that type of interaction. Next slide. So now that we've gone through and talked a bit about our objective, when we look at our constraints, we see that the formula is nearly the same. Now, the thing standing out is we have that m on top. That essentially is telling us that we could be 0 of these constraints, or there could be 1 or more of these constraints. So this all to say that there could be quite a few. And it's nearly the same thing. We have our x sub I, that's the item that we're interested in. And then we have that a sub I, that's our weight according to that item. So let's say in this case, it could be calories. So that's our calorie constraint. And then we also have the b sub I and j. So essentially our weight for having both x sub I and x sub j chosen together. So hopefully that helps to demystify a little bit of what we're trying to do. But next, we're going to talk about how we can map our problem into this map. All right, so we can represent our objective just like we did above. And we can think of that x sub I as at every menu item for our objective, and that the a sub I, since we're minimizing price, the a sub I is our price. And very easy, we just multiply those two together. And then for this equation, we could think about incentives, and we could think of the x sub I and j as those incentives and penalties for pairs. And kind of like I said earlier, maybe there's a pair of food items that don't go well together. Maybe there's a pair of items that go great, right? I don't know about you guys, but having a little bit of maple syrup with the chicken and the waffle is fantastic. So maybe we want to incentivize that pair. And for our objective for this round, we're going to ignore the constant. Like I said, there's a lot of great materials out there that can go into that, but we don't have anything that's going to go through the entire system for this objective. So next slide, please. All right, so now we can talk about an equality constraint. So we know that we're only allowed to have one item type per meal. So we know that, like, so one waffle, one chicken, one drizzle. And we can kind of describe that we're using the same formulation or using a slight derivative of that formulation we talked about above. So we know that we know what each of our item types, and we know that, so we can think of X sub I as one of those individual types, like maybe all the waffles, all the chicken offerings, all the syrup offerings. And we can think of A as their that coefficient. For this, we're not going to prioritize any waffles, one waffle over another. So we're not going to worry about that A sub I constant. But again, we can penalize pairs of that same type. So if two waffles are chosen for a solution, we're going to give that a really steep penalty. That way it discourages that type of solution. And now we can bring that constraint value in this part of the equation. We can think of that as the constant, which is our constraint value for this equation. And we can think of that as 1, since that we know for this whole set that they has to equal 1. So this is how we'd write that type of equality constraint. Next slide, please. And this is how we'd write an inequality constraint. So we know that our diner wants a meal that is less than 700 calories. So we can, once again, think of that X sub I as all of the items on our menu, and A sub I is their calorie count. And then the X sub I, X sub J is what you get when you put those two items together. So essentially it's just kind of adding up their interaction, their calorie interaction. But if we also wanted to incentivize or penalize pairs of calories, maybe there's you have some rule where you don't want fats and carbs together, something like that, which you can't do at a chicken and waffle shop, but you could also start to penalize those pairs here or make them seem less nutritious. And again, we're going to use our constant as our constraint value. And for that, we want it to be less than 700 calories. So we'll have 700 there for our constant. So this is great. We've been able to describe our problem in this CQM fashion. And now we're able to talk about how to build that objective in a bit of constraints. And next, we'll talk about how D-Wave offers some great tools to both build this type of problem and then submit it to the quantum annealer. So D-Wave does make it very easy to submit these type of problems. Have a library that's all in Python, D-Wave Ocean SDK, so you can just pip install and you're ready to go. The Ocean SDK, the D-Wave Ocean SDK has a DIMOD package that is just great for both adding constraints, adding the objective. There's a lot of little helper functions in there. And then they have the Leap Hybrid CQM Sampler class, and that's essentially what's going to help us submit our CQM to the quantum computer. Excuse me. All right, so now we're going to walk through a bit of Python, talk about a bit of the code that's there to help us solve these type of problems. As you can see on the very top, we're going to import DIMOD and that CQM sampler. Remember that CQM sampler, it'll come back later. And would presume that we have just a tad bit of knowledge of pandas, which I should have imported above, but will give me a pass on that one. So we're going to read our CSV in, and then we're going to create a binary object, that decision variable, for each one of our items in our data set. So that's that second and third line, the fourth line down there at the bottom. So now that we have a decision variable for each menu item in our problem. Next slide, please. Now we can build the objective. So the first thing we'll do is go back to DIMOD, build that CQM object. And then next thing we can do is we can just interrogate our data frame and tell it to multiply the price by every one of our binary variables that we have. That will give us a result called objective terms, and then we just take the summation of those terms and easily pass it to that set objective helper function. Our objective is set. Next slide, please. Now we could talk about building that calorie constraint, our inequality constraint. And again, we can go through our entire data frame, and we can say, give me all those binary objects, multiply it by all the calories. That'll give us a list of those values. And then we can sum that list. And then all we have to do for the constraint is say it's going to be less than 700. So it's just to say that D-Wave makes it really easy. If you can kind of grok the math we talked about above, and get your problem into that formula, it's very easy to actually get that into D-Wave's CQM model. Next slide. All right. So now we're going to build that menu constraint. It's actually a really popular problem called the one-hot constraint. There's a couple ways to solve this. They have a few different tools, but just to keep it easy, we'll talk about it as an equality constraint. And now we can just loop through all the unique values, in our item type column. And that's going to be our chicken, our waffle, our drizzle, our schmear. So we'll get all of those types. We can interrogate the data frame to only give us the menu items that are fitting that type. And then we can sum those together and set them equal to 1. That way, any solution that has more than one of those types gets penalized. Next slide, please. And finally, we can submit our problem. So remember the import from above, that hybrid sampler. We're just going to make an instance of that class. And then wham, bam, thank you, ma'am, sampler.cqm, sample CQM, and pass it the CQM object. The sample set will return back essentially a list of lists where all your menu items are represented, and you'll get a 1 if that menu item is chosen, or a 0 if the menu item is left off of the solution. So very easy to interrogate back and put it back into your problem set. And next slide, please. So to wrap it up, kind of just to finish talking about the problem, can you think of other potential constraints? Our team has thought of a couple others. So you could track the vegan, vegetarian, or kind of the meat option for every item. So you could also add the constraint to say, hey, give me only vegetarian options. And if we tracked protein and carbs and some of the other macros, that you could start to tailor it to specific diet. Let's say you're on a high protein, low carb diet. Say, hey, only give me those that are less than 700 calories and super high in protein. And like I said in the preamble, this problem isn't exactly what we're doing at PolarisQB, but it's pretty close. But if Polaris was a restaurant, we would have essentially around 500,000 items for each of those item types. You can think there's 500,000 waffles to choose from, which would take my wife forever to choose something from the menu if there were that many items. But let's see, we also have probably about 15 different constraints or 15 different properties that we constrain on. So more than just calories and price, we've got quite a few more of those. Some of those that come kind of with our data, some of those we enrich. And we also have more complex constraints built around individual items. We have a very good idea of which waffles go well with which schmear, go well with which chicken. So we have a lot more constraints, making sure that the values that are good together go together. Next slide, please. So like I promised in the beginning too, this was very, very simplified. There is a deeper dive online. We have a white paper on arXiv that you can go check out that goes through this exact problem and gets a little deeper into the math and gives a little more explanation with some resources. There also is a GitHub repo that has a Docker container set up that you can just Docker up, and it will try to run this problem. You'll need to apply for your own D-Wave key. And lastly, one of the ways we got started was with D-Wave's GitHub examples. The D-Wave examples are fantastic. Definitely how we got started. I spent a lot of time with those examples and also a lot of time with their training and other resources. So it's just been a very, there's been a lot of learning involved, but it's been a ton of fun. And I think that's about it for me. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Maurice. We had a request in the chat to please post the links to those, the 2 links that you just had on a prior slide. If you can copy those and post them into the chat, that would be great.
Will do.
We also had a lot of questions answered. Thanks, Bill. but we have a lot left. So if you have questions for our speakers, please go and put them into the Q&A box. But I want to kind of summarize a few of the questions here. So kind of looking at kind of the value that you see of quantum within life sciences more generally. You described kind of one problem. What are some of the use cases that you see more generally within life sciences that you think the technology could be applied to?
So one example or two examples that were shown, one was protein folding that's being worked on by another player in the biotech space. There are some other actors working on resolving peptides and how to create peptomimetic drugs, I believe. I'm not entirely sure, that's outside my primary skill set, but there is talk about that.
Okay, thank you. There were a lot of questions about kind of problem size. Oh, Shahar, did you want to add something to that?
I want to say that there are a lot of problems in biotech and in pharma that are relevant that are optimization problems, and that people are just now starting to explore, starting from choosing patient population in a large clinical trial, or maybe thinking what Bill's talked about earlier about supply chain. That all of these are something that can be solved here.
Okay. There are quite a few questions relating to problem size and how large a problem can be addressed. I mean, given there's 5,000 physical qubits or so. So what is the experience that you've had so far? Can you give the attendees kind of any guidance in terms of what size problems can be addressed with the hybrid solvers?
Right. So, and Susan just said at the very end, D-Wave offers multiple different solvers. We gave a quick demo of how to use the CQM, the constrained quadratic model that uses the hybrid solver. That is able to take up to 500,000 variables. So that's quite a few variables that you could make quite a big problem. We have actually leaned into the other side, the BQM QUBO side. And right now, our problems are more closer to 100 to 200 variables, and that's because we have to manage the penalties that correspond with all of those various solutions. And that the nice thing about solving it via the QUBO is that the problem might be smaller, but the compute is much cheaper. But you have to know a bit more. It definitely, it took us maybe a couple months to get our CQM solution in, and it took us quite a bit longer to get the QUBO solution. So if you want something quick and you have a big problem, CQM is great. If you can break your problem up into smaller chunks, then QUBO is much cheaper and works really fast.
Okay, thank you. Let's see, just kind of scanning through some of these. Here's one. So what are the KPIs used to establish that molecules found within a bigger search space are quote unquote better? There's some controversy about this in the literature as it relates to actual clinical outcomes.
Yeah, that's a great question, because better is so amorphic, right? First of all, I want to say that I'm going to tell you why we think they're better, but we published one white paper already about that on a specific example called NNMT, and we are publishing probably next week another example on a known drug called sorafenib. The way we define better is we have, first of all, we comply with all the requirement for a drug-like. And if you look in the literature, a lot of those molecules do not have those kind of compliance. So you will find molecule that maybe is a good binder, but the size is too big, or the solubility is too low. So we look at the whole set of properties. That's one thing. And the second thing is we have metrics. One of those metrics is how strong a molecule binds to the pocket. And we can show that the molecules that we design bind stronger. So the numbers are lower, which is a better binder, than in comparison to what you will find in the literature or what a chemist will design by hand. Chemists tend to think they have bias, and Quad in our system gets out of that bias, find things that they maybe not have thought of before. So this is how we define better.
Okay. And related to that, how does Polaris's quantum approach compare to classical approaches in terms of financial cost per molecule discovered?
Orders of magnitude smaller. To look at a fraction of this space, you're talking about spinning up an immense amount of cloud resources or some other form of HPC resource. There's a significant amount of overhead, not just with the direct operation, but how are you managing all that data flow, marshaling it in, marshaling it out? What sort of back end processing are you having to do once the computation is done versus being able to express it in the single formulation as a QUBO? Getting back with CQM, we get a smaller number of results at more constrained minima, whereas the QUBO, we get a larger, more diverse set of solutions. But again, this is happening in timescale of a minute, being able to submit the problem and receive the response back in a minute, so that in the course of a day, a chemist can reasonably iterate several times. We're spinning up those kind of cloud resources. That takes some time to spin up, process, spin back down. So again, I can't give you a hard quantified number, but back of the envelope, we're talking orders of magnitude.
Okay, and kind of related to this, and we get this question a lot, how do you know that you get the optimal solution better than what the classical process can do?
And that's what, as Shahar was saying, we've got a white paper coming out that just has some really awesome results. And we're not necessarily trying to say that we do something better than classical. We are trying to augment what classical does. So we looked at a drug, a known drug that has multiple uses. We put this drug through our system, and when it popped back out, not only were we able to find the drug that is under patent, when we looked through some of the other results, we were able to find other drugs that were under patent also. So it's a different way to think about exploring the space. We're not necessarily saying, hey, here's the brightest and the best. We're saying, here's where to look. These are the motifs that are giving us the best type of solutions.
Right.
Hopefully that helps.
A great answer. I mean, we get that question a lot. And I think this idea of narrowing down a huge search space into here are the places to look and then sending it back to classical is really how people are using the systems. And certainly from a hybrid perspective, kind of using what quantum does best and letting classical do what it does best is kind of the great approach here. Here's a question. I don't know if you'll be able to answer it, but does the FDA intend to maintain consistent screening criteria for candidate molecules in comparison to more traditional methods? I don't know if you can read into the mind of the FDA or what's been published, but
I would say that is strongly so far outside our realm of expertise and so far downstream in the process. We are not trying to go through FDA initial IND investigational new drug. That is well beyond how far we advanced candidates. We're simply trying to find interesting, relevant candidates that are good binders and address the problem. We are not in the business of actually going through the regulatory process.
So you're really helping those pharma companies kind of identify and get closer to potential things to be investigated.
Exactly. As Sean mentioned, reducing timescales from 3 years to months or weeks.
Right. Okay. And that kind of gets into another question with somebody who's kind of a little more recent terms of the kinds of problems you're doing from your chicken and waffle example and how kind of what the process and steps are more specifically in the projects that you've done.
Yeah, I have another analogy. One chicken and waffles is great. The white paper is up. The GitHub is up. Please go check it out. It'd probably give a much better explanation than I just did. But another analogy I like to use that fits a little closer to ours is also Lego bricks, is that we essentially have a Lego guide in front of us, and it's telling us essentially what the pieces could go here. And we just have a bucket full of Lego bricks, just a ton. And essentially we can interrogate that bucket and say, hey, for this first step, what pieces fit in this step? For the second step, what pieces fit in this step? And after we run our solution, it recommends, hey, if you're going to build this Lego instruction set, these are the pieces that you want to use. And that's all around that type of problem are essentially the constraints that we're running. Hey, is this brick the right color? Is this brick the right shape? Is this brick too fat? Is it too thick? Does this brick float? Is this brick very heavy and sinks? So that's essentially what we're doing, is we're looking at all those properties and picking out the right bricks or the best bricks. Don't want to say the best bricks for trying to build the Lego abstractions. So hopefully that helps.
Okay. All right, and maybe this gets into a little bit more, but can you describe the objectives you have incorporated a little more, model type, et cetera? Can a customer collaborator supply their own models?
Yeah, that's what and you can kind of start seeing by the Chicken and Waffles GitHub, is that we've kept everything very modular, very component oriented. So I don't want to necessarily say that these are only the properties I can optimize on. I want to be flexible and say, hey, there's going to be properties coming. Our chemists are constantly thinking of new stuff to develop. So we try to leave our framework very empty. So we love working with customers. And if you have a magic metric that can help us find those better molecules, we will try our best to incorporate that into the system and make that part of our multi-object optimization problem. So yes, we love hearing customer objectives. We work very closely to help create customer constraints. And if you give us new metrics, we'll be your best friend. Or
Okay,
Bill will be your best friend.
I think we have time for one more question. I will send the remainder of the questions to the folks from Polaris, and perhaps they can respond to them via email. In terms of kind of where you are in this whole process, someone is asking whether you've currently calculated a real drug molecule, or is this more about kind of testing, calibrating your code using smaller, kind of more toy models?
I'll pass it to
So,
Shahar. Go ahead, please.
Yeah. So we try, we do toy models, but we work on this to find real drugs, to solve real problems. This is the reason that our customers come to us. They want us to give them molecules that will become drugs that they can test in their own biochemical, cell-based animal models, so that they can test those molecules. So we do not have yet a molecule that is ready for, or any of the molecules that we developed with our customers that is ready for clinical trials, but we have molecules that are successful, that are moving through the pipeline.
Okay, well, with that, thank you all very much. As I said, we have recorded this. The slides will be available. How's the best way for folks to get in touch with PolarisQB, Shahar?
You guys can go to our website and send us an email from there, or you can connect with us through LinkedIn. We try to put things there on LinkedIn quite regularly, and you can see that. You can contact both the company and each one of us there separately. Okay, thank you very much. So before we leave, I just wanted to point out to folks that our next webinar is on October 17th. It is also kind of focusing in on a use case. This one, job shop scheduling, optimizing resource allocation and manufacturing. So if you go to the D-Wave website, you should see it on there. And if you get our regular emails, you will see that as well. So thank you so much. You'll get an email from us next week with links to the recording and the slides. Thank you, Maurice, Shahar, and Bill. And we wish everyone a good day.
Thank you, everybody.